Donald Trump's businesses. Tonight, the New York AG issued a statement that reads, quote, "We have informed the Trump Organization that our investigation into the organization is no longer purely civil in nature. We are now actively investigating the Trump Organization in a criminal capacity, along with the Manhattan DA." Much more on this development and what it might mean just ahead. Also tonight, nearly 5 months after the deadly Capitol riot and insurrection led by a pro-Trump mob, Republican House leaders are now openly opposing a bipartisan commission to investigate the riot. Tonight, on the eve of the House vote to create the 9/11-style commission, the leadership sent members of their party a letter telling them to vote no. The main objection cited was, quote, "The legislation establishes a commission to only investigate the attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. An easy answer here would seem to be, well, yes, it was the only violent insurrection at the Capitol that we know of in the modern era. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy set the stage for this earlier today when he came out with his own statement against the commission, noting its scope was too narrow and should include other acts of political violence. Earlier tonight, he defended his position during an appearance on Fox News.
Remember, on Good Friday, an officer was killed at the Capitol. We don't need to investigate that. What about all the riots that have led up throughout the summer, the unrest from BLM, Antifa, and others? No, you can't investigate that. This is driven solely by politics and Nancy Pelosi, but we should not be a part of that.
McCarthy's whataboutism and his objections come after several Republicans, including their top member on the House Homeland Security Committee, indeed endorsed the formation of the commission. This morning, Speaker Pelosi was blunt in her reaction.
Disappointing but not surprising that the cowardice on the part of some on the Republican side not to want to find the truth.
Even if this bill passes along party lines in the House, it will need 60 votes, meaning 10 Republicans would have to cross the aisle in order for it to clear the Senate. It's far from certain that those votes are there, even though the Senate Majority Leader is determined to bring the bill to the floor.
I will put the January 6th commission legislation on the floor of the Senate for a vote, period. Republicans can let their constituents know. Are they on the side of truth? Or do they want to cover up for the insurrectionists and for Donald Trump?
I'm safe in characterizing our conference as willing to listen to the arguments about whether such a commission is needed. We are undecided about the way forward at this point. We want to read the fine print.
Meanwhile, Axios reporting tonight that McConnell told his fellow Republicans during a closed-door caucus lunch today that he can't support the 1-6 commission in its current form. As all of this unfolds on the Hill, President is facing growing calls to make a more public and forceful demand for a ceasefire in Israel. Fighting and White House officials have urged Netanyahu to, quote, wind down military operations. NBC News has confirmed the New York Times reporting that the president took a tougher stance with Netanyahu during their private phone call yesterday, but that's not likely to satisfy Biden's critics, who want him to ditch the strategy of what the White House has called quiet but intense diplomacy in favor of public backing of a ceasefire.
I hope that the administration might lean in heavier, but whether they do or whether they don't, I'm on the Armed Services and Foreign Relations Committee, and I'm going to say loudly that there ought to be a ceasefire.
Today, a senior advisor to Netanyahu had this response to the possibility of an immediate ceasefire.
We're acting to defend our people. If we do a premature cessation of violence, that just plays into Hamas's hands. That works for them. They can have a timeout to regroup, recharge their batteries, and we'll have missiles on Tel Aviv again next week. That's not a solution. We have to come out of this with a sustained period of peace and quiet. That's good for Israelis, and frankly, that's good for Palestinians too.
With that, let's bring in our leadoff guest on this Tuesday night, Philip Rucker, Pulitzer Prize-winning senior Washington correspondent for The Washington Post. A.B. Stoddard, veteran Washington journalist, associate editor and columnist for Real Clear Politics. And Neil Katyal's back with us, Department of Justice veteran, former acting Solicitor General during the Obama administration. He has argued dozens of cases before the U.S. Supreme Court. And indeed, Counselor, we must begin with you, given tonight's breaking news. What does this change, this development, mean that the Trump Organization is now under a criminal investigation? What must have been discovered or unearthed to lead to this categorical change?
A lot, Brian. So cray-cray is back. I think for the last 120 plus days, we've forgotten about the constant lurches in the news cycle every day and night with Donald Trump. But it's back now with this official letter. This letter is not like ordinary politics. It's not some statement from Nancy Pelosi or Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. It's not even a Supreme Court loss, of which Trump had many, or a civil fine, of which Trump has paid many. This is a letter talking about jail time. And just to give you a sense how significant it is, if you go on the Trump Organization website, and pardon me, I've never had a demonstrative on before, but this is a picture of the Trump Organization's website right now. And you will see the very first thing, our story, Donald Trump. And then leadership, Eric and Donald Trump Jr. are the two people listed. So now look, I suppose Donald Trump can pull a Ted Cruz and blame his kids here or something like that. But absent that, what this letter is saying is that prosecutors believe that there is, a strong reason to think that the Trump Organization committed various crimes. And remember, the prosecutors here have Trump's tax returns. Trump fought a battle to the Supreme Court, which he lost 9-0 to keep this from the New York prosecutors, but they've got it. Very bad news for him.
So, Neil, let me take a second whack at this. This is New York City and state. Are there any limits on their scope or powers? Can they prosecute for good reason anybody for anything at any time?
Well, they've got to be crimes, of course, but I think the fact that the New York Attorney General, the state prosecutors involved, is very significant for two reasons. Number one, before this was largely fought by the Manhattan DA, Cy Vance, who's actually retiring. So there's a question about what would happen to that investigation after he leaves this fall. But second, more importantly, the New York prosecutors, the state prosecutors, have a suite of powers called the Martin Act, which is just about the most extensive anti-fraud criminal law of any state in the country. And it gives them sweeping powers. And so what this means in practical terms is that prosecutors are going to do everything they can with their new powers to flip various people in the Trump Organization. We've already had many reports that the CFO, Alan Weisselberg, has been the subject of those kinds of flips. They've even gone after his family and kids. And indeed, Jennifer Weisselberg at one point said, quote, the Trump Organization, control people by compensating you with homes and things. It's not easy to walk away when they provide your home. And so already someone's come forward and said, this is operating a little bit more like what a mob organization or something like that looks like. We've heard this, bandied about in the newspapers by commentators and the like, but it's a really different thing when you have criminal prosecutors saying, look, we think there's something serious here and we're warning you.
A.B. Stoddard, let's talk about a simpler time. Earlier today, before we understood the Trump Organization was under criminal investigation, when it looked like the biggest worry the former president had was this 1-6 commission. I'm tempted to say he tweeted a statement, but he can't do that. I guess he's faxing these, but here it is anyway. Republicans in the House and Senate should not approve the Democrat trap of the January 6th commission. It's just more partisan unfairness, and unless here's the whataboutism, murders, riots, and fire bombings in Portland, Minneapolis, Seattle, Chicago, and New York are also going to be studied. This discussion should be ended immediately. Republicans must get much tougher and much smarter and stop being used by the radical left. Hopefully Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy are listening. A.B. McConnell at least must get tired of being told to genuflect. What's Trump's worry on this matter?
Oh, well, President Trump, former President Trump on January 6th, at the end of that day, remember, he said, we will remember this day forever. Since then, he has learned that this would be a very uncomfortable thing to go through if he is called to testify, and that Kevin McCarthy is a fact witness. He had this very dramatic phone call with the president that day, begging him to step in, quell the violence, stop the siege, send reinforcements. And then, because it was such a negative conversation with Kevin McCarthy literally shouting, he relayed this to other members, many of them. And they are the ones who spoke about it in the subsequent days. He is not a very shrewd leader. He throws his rank and file under the bus. He did that on the Marjorie Taylor Greene committee vote when he first backed Liz Cheney on February 1. And he thought that dispatching Liz Cheney last week would take care of this. Now he has thrown John Katko under the bus, someone who negotiated this 1-6 commission with his permission and with his demands. And once they were met by the Democrats, he panicked. So now a vote of conscience has turned into, we're recommending, we're not whipping, but we're recommending and we're watching you that you vote against this. A bunch of Republicans in the House are going to vote for it because he doesn't lead and they're not following. The problem for McCarthy tonight is, once again, when he throws his own members under the bus, he still gets thrown under the bus by President Trump. someone he hoped, if he hung with, would help him become Speaker next year. And we all know how loyal Donald Trump is. So it's going to be a very interesting day tomorrow. But this is a mess, and largely of Kevin McCarthy's making. He doesn't want to testify about that phone call, even though he's told many people about it, and it's now part of the history. And obviously, he's doing his best to protect Trump from the commission as well.
Phil, AB raises such a good point. It is possible to want something so badly that you prevent yourself from getting it. We're not stupid. We heard McCarthy at one point say that Donald Trump bears responsibility for what happened on 1/6. We've seen the trip to Mar-a-Lago. We can imagine the communications between the two. We see how beholden the Republican leader is to the thrall of Donald Trump. And now the problem for McCarthy is he's going to lose members of his own caucus, correct?
Yes. It certainly appears that way, Brian. A number of House Republicans are likely to support this January 6th commission, including the House Republican, as AB was just mentioning, who was tapped by McCarthy to negotiate on behalf of the Republicans in setting up the compromise language for how that commission would be governed and how it would take shape. Let's keep in mind that this is only it's actually May of 2021. There are now 18 months before the midterm elections. That is a long time for Kevin McCarthy to play this dance with Donald Trump before he'll find out if he becomes the House Speaker. And, it's a very treacherous thing that the House Republican leadership is doing here in trying to please former President Trump and trying to not get crosswise with him, and discovering through these statements that the former president is putting out that the loyalty doesn't always go both ways. And so it's tricky here, but I would expect a number of House Republicans will vote for this commission. And we're also hearing, by the way, that a number of Republican senators are likely to vote for it, first and foremost being Mitt Romney.
Neil Katyal, back to you, and sorry for ping-ponging, but another legal question people may be asking. How can New York State reach into another jurisdiction? Trump is a Florida man now, having left New York behind. How does that work?
It works pretty simply because the Constitution itself has a clause in it that says if you commit a crime and you go to another state, that other state is obligated to turn you over. And in 1793, Congress passed the law affecting that. So, Governor DeSantis, I know, has been kind of auditioning and trying to be Trump's guy. And Trump has even floated the idea that Governor DeSantis will be his vice president in 2024, which, is beyond me why that's attractive to anyone. It's kind of like being the drummer for Spinal Tap or something like that. But in any event, that's what DeSantis is kind of signaling. It won't work. If the governor tries to protect Donald Trump from a prosecution, we don't have a formal prosecution yet of him, but if there is one, if the governor tries, it will be stopped in court every day of the week.
AB, a question about the party. Early to bed Republicans are going to wake up in the morning and see that the Trump organization is under criminal investigation, and Donald Trump is still going to be their North Star come Wednesday morning. How long can the party exist without ideas, thoughts, policies, initiatives of its own?
Well, they're not actually as unified as the commentary would lead you to believe from the last week, that Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger and Mitt Romney are alone on a leaky boat. I think they are, but it's interesting, as Phil mentioned, to hear from Senator Mike Rounds that they need a 1/6 commission, and that other extremist groups who rioted in other places had nothing to do with an attempted coup on our government on January 6th. So I think that there is a chorus of people running for president who secretly, if you hear that sound tonight, it's the sound of exulting by Josh Hawley and Nikki Haley and Mike Pompeo and Ted Cruz and others, who are hoping, of course, that the former president gets indicted so they can run for president and he doesn't Bigfoot the 2024 field. But over on the House side, if you're in a red district and your base doesn't believe in the insurrection and believes only in Donald Trump, you cannot support the commission on the House floor tomorrow, and you will continue to defend him through any kind of trials, investigations, etc.
I guess it's possible Senator Hawley celebrates with a fist pump. Phil, one last question on an overseas matter that we're about to examine in our next segment. How much movement is there inside the West Wing on this question of Israel? I get the feeling that policy is moving and migrating.
It certainly feels that way, Brian, if you look at the public statements that President Biden has been making the last few days. But more importantly, look at the reporting that's come out tonight from the New York Times and elsewhere about President Biden adopting a tougher tone in his private conversations.
Between Hamas and the Israeli military has continued into its 9th day and shows no immediate sign of letting up. Hundreds of people have been killed now, and there is a deepening humanitarian crisis in Gaza. The AP reporting that Biden
with Bibi Netanyahu to try to signal to the Israelis that it's time to stop here. He has not actually called for the ceasefire publicly that other Democrats in his coalition would like Biden to do, but he seems to be inching in that direction. And I imagine over the next couple of days, we'll see further movement. It's a real political puzzle for the president because keep in mind, Biden, when he was in the Senate, for decades has dealt with this issue of Middle East politics and Israel, and he has a very traditional Democratic view of that. But the power, the momentum within the Democratic coalition, within the progressive base, has been moving more and more to the side of the Palestinians, and Biden is grappling with that in real time as Democratic Congress members who have big voices in Washington are trying to liken this to the Black Lives Matter movement and the racial justice protests we have here in the United States. So we're seeing President Biden start to respond to some of that pressure within his left flank.
It's indeed busy for a Tuesday night in May, but these three guests got us to the finish line. Our thanks to Phil Rucker, A.B. Stoddard, Neil Katyal. Greatly appreciate the conversation tonight and the answers. Coming up, yet another tense day and night in the Middle East. France now supporting a resolution at the UN Security Council calling for an end to the fighting between Israeli and Palestinian militants. Back with us tonight, Richard Haass, veteran diplomat under multiple U.S. presidents, longtime president of the Council on Foreign Relations, author of multiple books. His most recent work, The World, A Brief Introduction, is now available in paperback. Richard, we're thrilled to have you with us. We're sorry about the subject matter. And here we go. I mean not to diminish any of the suffering or loss of life when I say this, but there is a sameness to this cycle as there has been in the past. The rockets look the same, though there's over 3,000 of them. The Israelis then hit back with what they swear are precision strikes, though we've seen them level entire high-rises and kill innocent families. What is different is a new generation has come up, asking different questions, wondering why Gaza appears to be a prison for 2 million souls who, if they're lucky, get electric power 4 hours a day. The new generation does not have that reflexive Israel at all costs policy that so many before them had. I know you are sensing this, and I'm wondering how this new attitude will affect the disposition of this fighting.
Brian, it's good to be with you. You're exactly right. We've seen this before. And what will happen is at some point there'll be a ceasefire, by which point Israel will have diminished Hamas's military capabilities, killed some of its leaders, killed a lot of innocent people. And what will happen is Hamas will gradually rearm. And even more worrisome, I would think, from Israel's point of view, is one, what you were talking about, the alienation of a younger generation that doesn't see Israel as the necessary country to protect Jews, a sanctuary for Jews after the Holocaust, but rather sees Israel more as Goliath than David. And I would think even just as worrying for Israel is what's happening internally. That there's 2 million Israelis who are not Jewish. There's 2 million Israelis who are Arab. And what we're seeing is a growing alienation, almost a civil rights-like movement, a radicalization. So Hamas is now emerging more and more as the spokesperson of a group that represent Palestinians wherever they live. And we're seeing a growing alienation, a growing rupture within Israeli society. And that is truly dangerous for the Jewish state.
Richard, what should, in your view, what should the U.S. do? It was striking to see the resolution brought up by France before the Security Council. Do we have leverage that we've almost forgotten we've had, right on down to the Iron Dome missile defense system that is keeping most of the ground population in Israel safe?
I think the United States should support a resolution. Better yet, I would introduce a resolution. And that way we have much more influence over the text. It would be both symbolically and I think diplomatically smart. I would not ban any arms sales to Israel because Israel faces all sorts of threats, Brian, from Hamas, from Hezbollah, from Iran. What I would do, though, is quietly reach some understandings with the Israelis about a ceasefire, about how American-supplied arms would be used. I'd also, rather than launch any new peace process, I would press the Israeli government hard to not take steps that would close off options down the road if and when the pieces for a diplomatic process would line up. No annexation, to stop some of the settlement expansion, stop some of the seizures, essentially to try to protect possibility for the future, understanding that we're not in a position now to move ahead diplomatically.
And Richard, how does the free world of civilized nations answer for the conditions prior to this, but certainly now post these airstrikes inside Gaza?
Well, again, it puts us in a position of looking somewhat hypocritical. How can we be a voice for human rights and protection of individuals around the world when we're not acting with the dispatch we ought to? Again, Hamas, though, does the Palestinian people no favor, Brian, by what it does. Indeed, the Palestinians have been cursed over the decades by a leadership that's either unable or unwilling to make peace. So now we have a terrible situation where we have an Israeli government that is not willing to meet the Palestinians halfway, and the Palestinians who are not willing to meet the Israelis halfway. It exactly explains where you began this report. Why from time to time the violence breaks out, things then come to a ceasefire, but there's no forward movement.
It is a mess. There are a few more thoughtful voices in the world on this mess, however, than our guest tonight, Richard Haass. Richard, we always appreciate when you come on and take our questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
I'm very puzzled by Leader McCarthy's now reversal and opposition to the commission. I wonder what Mr. McCarthy's afraid of. Is he afraid of subpoenas? Is he afraid of the truth? His opposition is troubling evidence that he's putting his self-interest, which is strangely tethered to Trump interest, above country, above duty, above the truth, above his own oath.
You may remember her, the Pennsylvania Democratic Congresswoman Madeleine Dean, as one of the House managers from the second impeachment. We have to itemize them now. That's the one where Trump was charged with inciting an insurrection. The same storming of the Capitol his devout loyalist Kevin McCarthy now does not want investigated. Back with us tonight, two returning favorites. Don Calloway, he's a Democratic strategist, member of the advisory board for the National Voter Protection Action Fund, also happens to be CEO and founder of Pine Street Strategies, a D.C.-based lobbying firm. And there's Bill Kristol, author, writer, thinker, Politico, veteran of the Reagan and Bush administrations, editor-at-large over at The Bulwark. And Bill, because of your prior association with this party, you get to go first. First of all, there's the lying that, as Michael Corleone would say, insults our intelligence. There's two members from Georgia, for starters. MTG saying it's the rioters who've been abused. Congressman Clyde saying those rioters looked much more like everyday tourists to him. But now on top of that, Republicans, as I said earlier, are going to wake up tomorrow morning to a former president, his organization now under criminal investigation. Is it going to start to matter to all these people who wake up every day and obey a retiree in Florida?
You know, I keep, for months, I would say for years, to be honest, I kept thinking, well, finally it's going to matter. Well, I didn't think it that much. I kind of, at some point I realized the reality, which was it wasn't going to matter. I don't know. There might be 30 votes tomorrow for the commission, which, for the sake of the country, we need to have this commission. But for Kevin McCarthy and for most Republicans, the less said about January 6th, the better. Anything that's said will expose what Donald Trump didn't do on the 6th, what he did in the run-up to the 6th, what other Republicans did, the phone call between McCarthy and Trump. It can't be good for them. And, I mean, Kevin McCarthy is the person, I think, who said, when was it, 2015, that he was happy about the Benghazi investigation, but it had done some damage to Hillary Clinton's approval ratings when she was getting ready to run for president. So it's all politics. And for McCarthy, it's all about winning the House and keeping Trump on board and then without offending too many people. I mean, the degree to which Liz Cheney, who had been swallowed hard and got along with Trump for a year, and then said no more after November 3rd and after January 6th, the degree to which she has turned out to be an outlier, one of a few honorable Republicans, not, unfortunately, a voice that they're listening to at this point, at least, is really striking, and I'm afraid we'll see that tomorrow. We might get about 30 votes, I think, for the commission, but that's a small number out of what are there, 210 House Republicans.
Don, something else I've said earlier, we've all known people who have wanted something so badly and have been so craven and willing to do anything to get it that in the end, the tragedy is the Charlie Brown effect comes in. It is robbed of them. What do you think McCarthy is afraid of if some of his peers look into just how and why it was that our Capitol was overtaken and looted on that day in January?
Well, elections are won in the middle. I'm going to vote Democrat. A whole lot of people are going to vote Republicans. I would imagine that Kevin McCarthy is afraid of losing that 4 to 6% who identify as independents and who vote with their wallets, who vote based upon how they personally feel on Election Day, or whether or not they feel like they have been fairly taxed over the course of the last year, or frankly, how the economy is going. I imagine that that's what he's worried about losing, and certainly an insurrection investigation would show that Republicans in power, from the president's office on down, knew about this, certainly turned a blind eye at best, or helped encourage it at worst. And you lose that middle percentage who probably could vote in either given way, depending upon which was the last best ad they saw, or again, how their wallets feel on that given day. But at the end of the day, an investigation into the insurrection that has real prosecutorial competence will show absolute fault by negligence or by intentionality on the part of members of the Republican leadership.
Bill Kristol, and we're down to limited time because of the breaking news tonight. Bill, you've made the point before that quote-unquote traditional tax cut conservatives in the Republican Party have found their own way to hold their nose and vote Republican on a ticket featuring Donald Trump. Do you see anything moving that kind of quiet part of the base?
Nothing has changed yet, I'm afraid. It's interesting, Don mentioned Trump and the Republicans, how close they are. Donald Trump's White House political director, Brian Jack, now works for Kevin McCarthy. I mean, the notion that Trump is some kind of outlier, that, they keep him at arm's length, they do want publicly to, but the fact is Trump and his operatives are working hand in glove with the House Republican Congressional Committee, with the Senatorial Committee, with all the candidates scattered around the country. So it is Trump's party, not just in the sense that they're scared of Trump in Mar-a-Lago, but there are Trump loyalists now throughout the ranks. They've done much more of that than people realized, I think, which is another reason why there's not much willingness to cross him.
Don, we're out of time. I owe you one for your next appearance when I expect yet another HBCU sweater or sweatshirt. We appreciate the representation around here. Don Galloway, Bill Kristol, gentlemen, thank you both. We'll do this again. Coming up, the motto of the United Our friend Carol Leonnig is out with a stunning new book on the many serious problems inside the U.S. Secret Service, the ones they have faced secretly over the years, including during the past administration. In Zero Fail, The Rise and Fall of the Secret Service, Carol details the concern among Joe Biden's team members about agents who had become loyal to Donald Trump. She writes this, quote, given all the ways the Secret Service had enabled Trump in the last year, from enabling his authoritarian march across Lafayette Square to the murmured support in the ranks for overturning Biden's election, it was understandable that the president-elect and his aides had doubts. So serious was this concern about Trump's corrosive hold on the Secret Service that Biden transition advisors urged that the agency swap out all members of the Trump presidential detail before Biden's inauguration. With us for more is the author of Zero Fail. That would be our friend Carol Leonnig, Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter with The Washington Post. I'm duty-bound to point out one of Carol's Pulitzers was awarded to her for her coverage of the Secret Service back in 2015. Carol, magnificent book, magnificent work. Is the holding about the modern era, the Trump administration, the reaction to 1/6, that maybe the bro culture, which you catalog inside the U.S. Secret Service and which has been with them as long as they've been around, and the MAGA culture meshed a little bit too easily together?
You know, you said that pretty well. You want to go on the book tour with me? I feel like that.
I'm good.
That explains a lot, Brian. There is a culture, alpha male in this DNA of this agency, which basically resists admitting weakness, admitting failure, and it errs on the side of covering up what's really going on behind the scenes, including serial screw-ups and mistakes and security gaps and misconduct. And in this instance, under Donald Trump, right when the Secret Service needed help the most to recover and rebuild, this president deployed this, noble agency with a wonderful reputation as a political tool for his own gain. And that is the way he treated most government agencies in the executive, something that would help him personally, and especially help him get reelected. So it is not a shock to agents in that wonderful agency that many members of the president's detail were judged on their loyalty, and they became very loyal to President Trump, to the point that they supported his forcible removal of peaceable protesters outside the White House at Lafayette Square on June 1. when people were protesting the death of George Floyd. And the leadership of the Secret Service supported allowing a senior executive who used to run the president's detail to become a political advisor and deputy White House chief of staff in Donald Trump's White House. The person who was in charge of getting his political message out, helping him in his campaign, staging his image, and also this clearing of the White House that you are seeing on the camera now.
Your book, the reporting is so powerful. The director of the Secret Service has said in a statement tonight, the American people can rest assured that the